Is there a right to rescue animals? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. The right to rescue animals is becoming more of an issue in a lot of legal circles and some political circles because of a case that has been developing in North Carolina. Wayne Hsiung, who was an animal rights activist, was convicted by a jury of larceny and breaking and entering for rescuing a goat that was sick with pneumonia at a meat farm. Wayne joins us now. Wayne, the jury just returned its verdict in early December. Tell me about the case. And what your grounds for appeal might be.
Well, David, we got a call from a local animal rescue called Brother Wolf Animal Rescue, which is one of the most prominent dog and cat rescue organizations in Western North Carolina, about cruelty calls they were receiving from farms and slaughterhouses. They didn't really know what to do with it. And my background as an investigator and attorney gave me the experience and I think necessary knowledge to try and address the situation. So we looked into the conditions at one particular goat meat ranch, found a couple extremely ill, sick baby goats, took them directly to the same rescue that called us in to help out with the animal cruelty cases. And the goats are alive today because of the care they received at this rescue. The result of this was the industry came out very strongly against the rescue, didn't like the fact that we documented what we were doing. And really, to me, this case is as much about the First Amendment as animal welfare, because I think the primary reason we're being punished is because we published on Facebook Live everything we did, which is not typical of someone who's stealing something from a company.
And that gets to this whole sort of strategy, right? In animal rights activism now, something known as open rescue, where you identify who you are and sort of what you're doing. And as you mentioned, it was successful the first time around, but then you go back to another, I guess, meat farm and try to rescue the goat. And that's where you get prosecuted for an event that happened in 2018. What happened during the trial?
The trial was fascinating because it showed kind of the extensive efforts the government was going to make to be pretty much gag us and talking about what we did and why we did what we did. You know, on the first day of trial, the prosecution filed a motion saying that we couldn't talk about the condition the goats were in. And the prosecutor literally said that this is a case no different than the stealing of a chair or a garbage can. And I made the point in court that there's a difference between a chair and a dog, a trash can and a goat. And I think most people, from just a common sense moral perspective, understand that. You kick a chair, the chair doesn't cry. You kick a baby goat, they will. And it's why I think most people, even in North Carolina and even rural conservative counties, if we were able to actually tell the story of why we did what we did, probably would have supported taking this goat to the vet.
So you had to go in front of a jury and try to explain that you were justified in taking the goat without being able to explain what condition the goat was in?
Yeah, I was cut off in my opening statement mid-sentence. The jury had to leave the room. We had a veterinary expert who was trying to testify. She was cut off. We weren't allowed to talk at all about the animals. And I think it's because these industries, they know that when people actually hear about the mistreatment of animals, they are affected by it. They're hurt by it. They empathize with animals. I mean, on Facebook, the company recently released that 2 out of the 6 biggest platforms on Facebook are animal rescue platforms because people love animals. And they don't want to see baby animals of any type starving or sick or mistreated in any way.
So the jury has to make a very narrow ruling, and they find that yes, you did. You admitted you went in and you took this thing, and they convicted you of larceny and breaking and entering without them understanding why you did it. What are the constitutional grounds that you might have a chance on in terms of the appeal?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, every defendant has a right to present a defense, and we weren't really given that right in this trial. And I think that when an appellate court sees that not just the defenses we wanted to bring a defense called necessity, basically arguing that there's an injured human being or animal, and it's kind of like the dog in a hot car situation. You're entitled to engage in more minor law-breaking activity to save a life or to save the health and well-being of an animal in need. But more generally, I think that the jury had a right to just hear the story. There's a lot of case law suggesting and holding that when a defendant is facing a criminal charge, at a minimum, the defendant has a right to tell their story, explain who they are, why they did what they did. And usually it's the prosecution that is trying to introduce evidence and the defense trying to gag evidence. In this case, those roles were reversed because I think the prosecution understood that if the jury knew more about my background, why I did what we did, they would have been sympathetic.
Now, you are facing it's 7 years. You could be sentenced to prison if you don't win on appeal. There is this argument that's been sort of surfaced and something of a debate within the animal rights community and a lot of activists in general about whether there should be this sort of open rescue identity, because the danger is that if you publicly identify yourself before you do something, you do make it easier to be arrested. if you get arrested and you're convicted and the conviction is upheld, well, you're an activist who would therefore be taken away from future potential rescues had you not identified yourself. What do you make of that argument?
Yeah, I don't fault anyone for wanting to remain anonymous, whether we're talking about whistleblowers, activists, protesters, and a lot of people don't want to be in the media. They don't want to be on social media for, I think, quite reasonable basis. I mean, there's massive over surveillance of activism and even ordinary people in this country. Having said that, my reading of history is that the most powerful activism has always been transparent and open. And we want to be as far from the industry as possible. The industry is passing ag-gag laws, trying to keep everyone in the dark about how food is made. We want to be open and transparent about everything we do. And I think that's part of the reason the industry sees this as such a threat, because they see that when the public sees we're acting with openness, transparency, trying to act with as much integrity as possible, they trust what we're saying. They see that we're not trying to hide anything, even our own identities, when we face criminal charges in these rural conservative counties. And that gives us moral power that the industry doesn't have.
Have the conditions for animals, whether they're in slaughterhouses or headed to meat farms and whatnot, have they been getting better or have they been getting worse over the last several years?
It's funny, there's a lot of marketing that would make you think that things have gotten better. But I think Steven Pinker actually makes this point in one of his recent books, that while the human condition has improved a lot and the state of the world has gotten a lot better for impoverished peoples, marginalized communities in many ways, animals are a pretty big exception to that. The growth in meat consumption is part of that. But also, frankly, just the ecological impacts of the meat that's already been produced. We're losing land at a rate that is totally unsustainable. And because of that, we have to cram more and more animals into a smaller amount of space. And unfortunately, because the USDA pretty much governs all of the marketing regulations on food, and because the USDA has been completely captured by the industry, there isn't really anyone watching these companies when they market their products as free range. So my sense is most of the efforts that have been made, while a lot of them are important symbolic efforts, I'm supportive of the measures Californians have taken over the last 10 years to improve the plight of farm animals. The reality is animals are probably in a worse state today than they've ever been in human history.
And you just said free range, and I thought you just said that there's really nobody monitoring whether something really is a free range chicken or goat or cow or whatnot. Is that still the case? I mean, is that something that still exists even within the Biden administration's USDA? That's any company can label their product as a free range chicken, but they don't have to prove it.
Pretty much. There was a good piece on Vox recently by Jessica Scott Reed on this question, but the reality is, even if something's marketed as free range or organic, and technically under the federal organic program, animals are supposed to have access to the outdoors. Even if a company is complying with the law, oftentimes compliance is as simple as putting a tiny little platform outside of a massive 25,000 chicken factory farm, letting 3 chickens out maybe once a month. And none of the other chickens ever see the outside, ever see the sun before they're slaughtered. And then the eggs are still being marketed as free range, organic, or cage-free. So the reality is, ultimately, as long as animals are treated as commodities, there's no animal who can call up the USDA or the local authorities and say, hey, they never let me outside. They don't have this sort of power. And we have to ask ourselves, when it comes to these incredibly vulnerable beings who've been bred to be gentle, who've been bred to be fond of human beings, do we really believe in commercializing these individual beings' lives to the point that billions upon billions of them are subjected to conditions that, frankly, most of us, when we look at them, can't even stomach to see it?
Wayne, how long ago did you get involved in animal rights activism, and was there a particular event or something that triggered it?
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself an animal advocate and certainly an animal lover, like most Americans, my entire life. But the vivid experience I had was when I was a kid at the age of 8. I went back to China for the first time, and I saw an animal that we don't typically see as a food animal here in the United States, a dog, in a cage being prepared for slaughter. And she looked exactly like my dog. And that was the beginning of this journey.
And you've been an attorney in addition to the animal rights activism. How receptive generally, I mean, putting aside your case in North Carolina, but generally, how have the courts been in terms of this idea that an animal is a sentient being, that it's not like a chair, it's not like an object? How has that gone down in courts and in legal circles over the last several years?
I think we're making absolutely astounding progress, to the point that in the next generation will be the generation, I think, that will be remembered as the generation that embraced the idea that all the living beings of this earth, not just human beings, not just a particular class of human beings, but all living creatures that can feel pain, deserve legal protections. And I'll just give you 2 examples. One is, in New York, the Court of Appeals, the highest state court, recently ruled that Happy the elephant was entitled to a habeas corpus proceeding. A habeas corpus proceeding, lawyers may know from Guantanamo and other cases, is a proceeding you bring on behalf of a person who's been unlawfully detained. And the Court of Appeals is going to hear an argument as to whether an elephant held in captivity should be considered a person who's been unlawfully detained. But second, I want to just say that in California, we've reached the point that not only are we imposing regulations on mistreatment of animals in the food system, but we outright ban the production and sale of fur on the grounds that we realized after seeing what was happening to these animals that they're not just commodities, they're not just coats for wealthy people to wear luxurious garments, but they're animals, just like our dogs and cats. And the fur industry was a very salient example because oftentimes dogs are inadvertently used in fur because so much of it is produced in China.
Well, Wayne, it is a pleasure having you on. Wayne Hsiung, he's an attorney and co-founder of the Direct Action Everywhere. Good luck in the appeals in your trial in North Carolina, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, David.
You got it. On behalf of Marissa Matthews, John Skipvalaco, Asher Cofield, and the entire team at the Young Turks, I'm David Schuster. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.